For this afternoon and tonight, a significant winter storm, including heavy snow with limited freezing.
Hello, and welcome to the Snow Brains podcast, where it's my job to interview the most intelligent people in the snow sports industry and pass their fascinating knowledge on to you, our listeners. I'm your host, Miles Clark. I'm a professional free skier, a professional mountain guide, a UC Berkeley molecular cell biology graduate, the founder and CEO of Snow Brains, and a bear once scratched me across the face when I was 10 years old, sleeping in a tent with my family in the mountains of California. I didn't even wake up. The Snow Brains podcast is brought to you by Alta Ski Area. Come for the skiing, stay for the skiing. My guest today is legendary free skier and ski mountaineer, Chris Davenport. Chris was the world extreme skiing champion in both 1996 and 2000. He's been in over 30 Warren Miller ski movies and a bunch of other ski movies, doing things like Huck 100-foot cliffs in Alaska. Chris's ski mountaineering achievements are unparalleled. He was the first to ski all 54 of Colorado's 14,000-foot peaks in a single year. The guy even skied the Lhotse face at 27,000 feet in the shadow of Mount Everest. Oh, and then he summited Mount Everest, while guiding, no biggie. Chris is also an author, a TV commentator, a professional speaker, a professional mountain guide, a first descent aficionado, and all-around good guy. Hello, Chris. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. How are you, man?
I am fantastic. Thanks, Miles. It's been a really nice fall. I'm home in Aspen, Colorado, and while I have been skiing, the last couple of days have been warm, so I've been on my bike as well. Life's good. I feel a little guilty with what's happening in the world because it's such chaos that my life seems fairly stable at the moment. The family's all healthy. But yeah, looking forward to ski season and whatever it brings.
And when did you ski last?
I skied yesterday. Actually skied the last 4 days in a row here. We actually don't have a lot of natural snow yet, but I'm the president of the ski club here, our Aspen Valley Ski and Snowboard Club, and we raise a ton of money to make snow and get a good surface down for all of our athletes early in the season, way before the ski area even opens. So I've been kind of involved in just coordinating that and getting that off the ground. And it's a big responsibility, but it's great. I just took over in August this year, and in a year
Congrats.
that I'm pivoting my travel to be like more local, I've got the time to do it. So it's good.
That's great. And so you got a few days this season. Same, I'm in Park City. Same thing has been happening. I got 2 winter days.
Yep.
The last couple of days have been very spring-like, and I didn't ski today, but it'll come back quick. Chris, you're a very complex human being with many facets. Even Red Bull had to create an 8-part video series called Faces of Dav just to begin to explain you. So what I want to do today is kind of explain to our audience your mindset behind some of your impressive projects, your accomplishments, philosophies. So let's start with some rapid fire questions before drilling down into your bigger stuff.
Okay.
Great. So the rapid fire round, here we go. So how many days do you ski per year?
I typically ski probably between 200 and 250. So that would be, a few days in October, then most days in November, of course, every day, December through probably May, a little bit in June, and then the whole month of August, just depending what sort of shoulder season trips I might have going on, ends up being, 200 or 250. And it's funny because people will ask that, like, as a pro skier, like, how many days a year do you ski? And I'm like, 200, 230, whatever. And they're like, oh my God, that's crazy. I'm like, well, how many days a year do you go to work?
Right.
This is what I do. So if I'm not skiing, I'm not making any money. I'm not working. So then they go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it still is impressive. How many of those days do you think are backcountry?
Not as many as you might think. I mean, more recently in my career, people think of me as a ski mountaineer and backcountry skier, but I still do a lot of resort skiing, a lot of coaching, a lot of, photo shoots and different things for brands. So I don't track it. I don't know. Let's see, if call it 200 days a year, probably 100 is in the backcountry, or at least, some touring off the ski area or something like that. So enough. I mean, I don't feel like I think there's a balance there. There's a good balance there. I mean, I love skiing on resort. I love where I live here in Aspen Snowmass, and I can get a lot done there. And of course, I also love being in the backcountry and mountaineering. So it's a good balance.
What's your main goal when you go skiing? What are you looking for out there?
I think there's a couple main goals. The first one, when it comes to being in the backcountry, my main goal is to connect with nature. I just want to plug in to the world, the natural world. I want to, step away from the digital world and kind of the news cycle and everything that's going on around us, which is so crazy these days. I just want to connect with nature. If there's a couple friends along or a couple clients along, talking about what we're feeling, what we're hearing, what we're seeing, and just kind of being present in that moment. That's the thing I love about being in the mountains. When it comes to resort skiing, oftentimes I love working on the technical side of skiing. I love working on my own technique. I love the physical and fitness side of skiing on resort and kind of charging hard all day long. While I'm not thinking about connecting with nature as much when I'm skiing on the resort, I'm definitely stoked on other aspects of the sport. So yeah, they're two different experiences and equally awesome.
What's your biggest accomplishment in ski mountaineering?
My biggest accomplishment in ski mountaineering, it's hard to say. I mean, I guess the easiest thing to point to would be skiing all the Colorado 14ers in a year. But after that, in 2013 through 2015, myself and my two good partners, Ted and Christy Mann, finished skiing the Centennial Peaks, which is the 100 highest mountains, which doesn't have as much cachet and didn't get as much press, or if you will. But to us, it was a bigger accomplishment. A lot of these peaks have very few ski descents on them, or had new routes that we could do, or were more remote, or were more difficult. And so that one really stood out, and it's stood the test of time. Nobody's repeated that since. So we'll see where that goes. I've skied a lot in the Himalaya. I've skied, a bunch of new routes in Alaska, in the Alaska range. So there's individual lines that stand out, but those projects were pretty cool. The only other one I would mention was what I would call the ultimate road trip with buddies, was going up to the Pacific Northwest and skiing every major volcano from NorCal up to the Canadian border in 14
Which volcano
days.
was your favorite?
I'm a big fan of Mount Rainier. I think I've skied Rainier 5 times. There's so much 360 degrees of skiing on Mount Rainier and so much history. I love that mountain. But the biggest surprise on that project was Mount Jefferson.
The most stunning of the Cascade volcanoes.
So stunning. Oh my gosh. That one really blew my mind, going across the Pacific Crest Trail early in the morning and heading up to this very steep, very pointy, and very full of snow mountain that just delivered. I was with Glenn Paulson and and Jim Morrison and Ted Mann and Christian Pondella and like this whole crew of legends. It was like amazing.
Wow.
So that one was great. I would go back and do that in a heartbeat.
What's your biggest accomplishment in life?
My biggest accomplishment in life is somehow being able to create a career as a skier and ski mountaineer and raise a family. I am the first one to admit that I have not been as present as a parent or as a husband over the last 20 years as many people would assume one should be. I've been all over the world doing what I do. And yet somehow, because of my wife and our love for each other, we've managed to create a wonderful family and a wonderful relationship. And yeah, I think we've been married 21 years now. And that's the biggest accomplishment by far. That is really hard work, as anyone who's in a relationship knows. It ebbs and flows, and it's always demands your attention. And to be able to do what I've done as an athlete and still have what I have as a family is remarkable, I think.
Clearly, you have a very strong partner. How do you define yourself?
Define myself with one word. Can you guess what it is?
Skiing.
Skier, yeah.
Skier, yeah.
Yeah. I'm a skier. I mean, that's how I define myself. I live and breathe and love the sport of skiing and everything that goes along with it. We can dig into the history of skiing and the locations around the world and the people who have made this sport what it is, and the equipment and the actual activity and where it takes you and how it helps you understand who you are and what you're capable of. I mean, it's just, you can unpack it in so many different ways, but the sport itself has just delivered. And I'm fortunate. I grew up in a skiing family, 3rd generation skier. My kids are 4th generation. It's just been such an incredible part of our lives and an incredible thing to sort of make a small impact on.
And with that love for skiing, where do you think is your favorite place to ski?
That's always a really hard question. I get that a lot. Like, where do you love to go? I love to go wherever it's good. You can understand that. And I know a lot of your listeners, when you nail it, it doesn't matter where you are when it's great. That you're in the moment and you're skiing powder and it's dumping out and you're with your friends. Like, that's what the sport is all about. But I will say, I'm just going to list off my favorite places: the Chugach Mountains of Alaska, the Coast Range of British Columbia, the island of Hokkaido in Japan, Aspen Snowmass where I live, and the Elk Mountains right here, the San Juan Mountains of Southwest Colorado, the Tetons of Wyoming and Idaho, the Swiss Alps, and to a degree the French Alps as well, and the Dolomites of Italy. I skied my first trip in Morocco in the Atlas Mountains last spring, right as COVID was striking. In fact, we escaped Morocco to get back to the States at the last minute.
Wow.
That place is stunning. And then some Portillo, Chile, a place that I would have spent my 20th year in this summer, but it was canceled. It was closed because of COVID. And then the final one I'll add is a place that's also dear to your heart, Miles, which is Antarctica and the Antarctic Peninsula, one of the greatest destinations for ski touring in the world. So
amazing.
How's that for a list?
I'm a little bit stunned right now. Yeah, that's a list, and I think that's something people are really going to listen to. That will be listed in the description and more.
I mean, and there's a lot of other places out there, but I know let's keep moving. I'm going to
I agree. No, that was a great list. And you're right. The list does go on. What would you do if you couldn't ski?
If I couldn't ski, I wanted to be a doctor. And since I've been through a lot of orthopedic procedures, I'll say I would have been an orthopedist.
Very cool. I was on track for medical school as well.
Yeah. I mean, helping athletes, helping people with physical issues, I think would have been really cool. And I was an EMT for a long time. I let that lapse, unfortunately, but I love medicine in general and fascinated by the human body. And so I think doctor would have been good. Orthopedist, we'll call it.
What scares you the most in the mountains?
I would say the thing that scares me the most has evolved over time, but right now it's bad decision-making. I think that when you're out there and you're faced with decisions and you make the wrong one, that can get really scary. It's not, if you asked me maybe 10 years ago, I might have said avalanches or falling off a cliff, or I don't know, something like a physical thing, but it's making poor judgment or bad decisions, I think, is pretty scary.
Because we know how those can snowball. A small one leads to another small one, and after 10 small ones, you're in big trouble.
Yep.
What do you love most in the mountains?
I said this earlier. The thing I love most is the connection to nature. It's my religion, if you will. It's where I feel most spiritual, most uplifted, most connected to who we are as a people. I mean, human beings evolved over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years to this point where, in a few generations, we've surrounded ourselves with all this sort of artificial world. But at the end of the day, we are animals and creatures of the earth. And so when I am out there in the mountains and with friends in the natural environment, that's when I feel the best.
I agree. That is the best part. I have to agree with you there. What's the funniest accident you've had in the mountains?
This one wasn't actually it was kind of in the mountains, but in 1997, I was on a Warren Miller film shoot in Girdwood, Alaska, with Chugach Powder Guides, heli skiing, and Alyeska Ski Resort. And back then, Nissan Cars was the sponsor of the Warren Miller films. We had picked up a Nissan, I think it was like a Pathfinder, from the dealership in Anchorage. And one night it was just dumping snow in Girdwood like crazy. And we had been at Tommy Moe's house, and the other athlete, Dave Swanwick, Swanee, and I decided we would go rally this Pathfinder around in the deep snow and just see what it was capable of. And we ended up upside down on the roof. We flipped it, crashed it, hit a telephone pole.
Oh, man.
Everybody was okay, but we had to drive that thing back to the dealership the next day. And I didn't film for Warren Miller for a couple of years after that. Big trouble.
Wow.
Everybody was okay.
That's better than I thought I'd get out of that question.
Well, you did. Well, I try to over deliver.
That was amazing. Wow. I can imagine bringing that back to the dealer. All right. Well, we'll flip the script on it. What's the scariest accident you've had in the mountains?
I've been in a couple avalanches. Those are super scary. Just like a car accident, actually. Anytime you lose control in life, when things are spiraling out of control and all of a sudden you're going for the ride and there's nothing you can do about it, that is terrifying. And I think, maybe we'll touch on this a little bit later, but avalanches are absolutely terrifying. And I'm very fortunate that I'm still sitting here talking to you, to be honest.
I had my first avalanche last season and it was so terrifying. How many avalanches? Oh my God. Yeah. You know about it. You probably watched it. It was, and the quote that I say in the middle of it scared the hell out of people. How many avalanches have you been in?
I've been caught in 2, skied out of a number of them. I mean, back in the 90s and 2000s, it was like kind of a thing to like ski a line for the film and like, get some slough or some big thing to go and kind of like race out the bottom. And I think back on that now and like how just dangerous and somewhat irresponsible that whole mindset is. But I got caught a couple times, both times while filming. One was in Switzerland on the backside of the Eiger in the Bernese Oberland, and one was in Haines, Alaska. Both involved persistent weak layers that I just kind of hit the right spot and triggered a slab, and then couldn't get out of it, and then went for a big ride on both of them. One, I was buried during the avalanche. I've got a GoPro shot where it just all goes dark black for like 3 seconds, and then I sort of fight my way to the surface, and I ended up on top on both of them. I got injured on both of them, but not that bad. And I just consider myself super lucky. And it took those events for me to really realize what my own personal sort of red flags or maybe human factors that lived within my own mind were. That sort of drove me out of filming, to be honest, because I've got a family. I can have a wonderful time skiing and guiding and being a skier without taking those risks. And filming led me to risks that were beyond what I was comfortable with.
Absolutely. Would you tell us a little bit more about that? That's interesting. I didn't know that about you, that it was that scenario that maybe led you away from the ski movies like MSP.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't conscious decisions like right afterwards, but it was like back-to-back seasons where I had avalanche accidents where it was like, man, the camera's rolling. I want to send it. And, I want to put down a gnarly line and like make it look good for the film, because then I'm going to be on movie tour next fall and everybody's going to love it and we'll get a lot of cheers. And it's just like that whole, like I said, mindset of the way I was skiing. And I was getting older as well. I mean, at this point I was probably in my late 30s. It just led me to think about like, what was causing these accidents and what was causing these decisions. And it was this, like, that's sort of, I don't know what you call it. Is it so like the social interaction heuristic almost, where you want that sort of adulation, or you want people to be giving you props,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's like social facilitation. It's like, do you need an audience for your exploits? Certainly if I had no audience, I wouldn't have skied those lines that way. But because I knew the cameras were rolling, I skied in a way that was just irresponsible. I would never ski it like that with friends or with clients or my family. I would have done ski cuts. I would have done one turn at a time. I would have gone safe zone to safe zone, and I would have understood the terrain features below me better and all that kind of stuff. So that certainly was a wake-up call, which I think we all need and we all have. You had it, you just mentioned, and these are just 2 of mine, and I've had many others. One particular, I'll make this really quick, much earlier on in my career, in 1999, I was filming in Chamonix for Global Storming, the classic Matchstick movie Global Storming.
I remember it.
Dean Cummings, Wendy Fisher, Seth Morrison, and I were filming on the Brevant one morning after a couple feet of new snow. Sun was coming out. It was getting warm. We had just shot some amazing shots all morning, and it was getting warm. So we were like, we got to regroup and reassess. And we got into a zone and we're kind of talking about our options. And no sooner had we done that another film crew had come in above us And literally the same area where we had been filming on our tracks, they launched some airs and fractured the entire slope. And it took one snowboarder all the way to the valley floor, like 5,000 vertical feet, and killed him. And I was the first one on scene. That moment in time and that experience with that crew sort of set us on a path of safety thinking that I probably wouldn't have had that not occurred early on.
Wow. Well, and that kind of leads into my next question. How many friends have you lost in the mountains?
A lot. Sometimes I think about the number and I try to run through the list in my head, but it's dozens and dozens of people. And it's gotten to the point where I feel like I've almost lost sensitivity to my own emotions. Like when someone dies, I have a hard time being outwardly emotional. Like if you're an ER doctor, perhaps, or if you're in a war and you see it time and time and time again, you become a little desensitized. And I actually feel like that's happened to me. And maybe it's like a PTSD thing, but so many close friends, every single one of them, it could have been me. I've been out there doing the same thing and somehow I'm still here. And I mean, maybe that's partly good decision-making. Maybe it's partly right place, the right time, or, not being in the wrong place. But it's something that I carry with me as a bit of a burden and think about those people a lot.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think a lot of us who spend a lot of time in the mountains have lost a lot of people out there, and it really does weigh on you. Have you ever been hurt while skiing?
I have blown my knee a couple times.
ACL?
Yeah, well, ACLs, tibial plateau fractures, a couple ACLs and a tibial plateau fracture. I've broken my hand, I've broken my thumb, I've broken my arm. I landed on a rock off a sweet cliff in Snowmass and sliced my ass open.
Oh,
like a nice 6-incher.
Oh, that's scary.
But that's it. Nothing major, just kind of like fender benders, if you will.
That's
nothing
good.
You can't fix. Nothing you can't fix, and do a little rehab and be right back at it. I've been lucky that my body's in great shape right now, so that's good.
Good attitude and good results. You've been on ski expeditions all over the world. Which was your favorite ski expedition?
Probably the first time I went to Antarctica.
Yeah.
Oh no, sorry. It would have been the second time I went to Antarctica. The first time was with Ice Axe. It was the sort of somewhat legendary trip where the ship, the Orlova, broke. And we sat in port in Ushuaia for a few days, and then they finally canceled the whole expedition. Everybody left, and about 10 of us stayed and for a few days and got on another boat and went to Antarctica, and they allowed us to ski. And I was one of the guides, and we made it happen. And what I saw down there blew my mind in a way that it had never been blown before in terms of seeing terrain. I mean, maybe the only other time that I can compare it to is the first time I went to the Alaska range. But I vowed that the next year I would come back and spend a lot more time there to really discover the place. So the next year, myself and Stian Hagen and his wife, Andrea Binning, and some filmers and photographers went down to on a sailboat for a month, on a 70-foot sailboat, and spent a month on the peninsula. And that was just, I miss those days. It was so free and away from the world, and we didn't have internet, and it was just like living in the moment. It was precious.
I actually had a question to ask you about that trip and crossed it off because I just don't want to hear it. It pisses me off. That trip is beyond cool.
Yeah, it was cool. We skied some awesome first descents. Oh
my gosh. I mean, nobody does that. What challenges you most intellectually on a daily basis?
That's a tough one. Intellectually, I think finding a balance between being an athlete, being a skier, and understanding all of the requirements that come along with that job, finding the balance between that and this world we live in of social media and social interaction, where you sort of, because maybe you have sponsors or the media needs to hear from you, whatever it may, that you have to have this presence on social media. So thinking through for me, it just feels like a struggle, how much I want to interact. I don't really want to be honest. I want to just be out in the mountains, skiing and guiding and being with people and educating and learning myself. So I feel like I'm just constantly walking the balance beam of this social media world that we live in. And sometimes I just want to jump off completely. And I kind of have. I haven't looked at Facebook in probably a year, but I'm still on it, but I just don't look at it. But I don't know if that really answers the question, because is that intellectual or not?
I think it does, because it's about the challenge, and that
Yeah.
balance is very precarious. And I think we all deal with that. What's your favorite book?
Oh, I've actually got a really cool mountaineering book collection. Really proud of these books. I was lucky to grow up in a family that loved the mountains, and so I was introduced to rock climbing and ski mountaineering as a young teenager. And I think I started subscribing to Climbing Magazine when I was probably 16. So this is 1986, and was learning about these French alpinists that had done all the great things in the golden era of alpinism. And this is even before that, but my favorite book is The White Spider by Heinrich Herrer. Heinrich Herrer wrote 7 Years in Tibet as well. And The White Spider is about the first ascent of the Eiger, the north face of the Eiger in Switzerland. And it's steeped in history. It takes place at the beginning or early days of what would be the Nazi regime in World War II. And it was made into the Clint Eastwood movie, The Eiger Sanction. And I have a first edition signed copy of that book. And it's like one of my prized possessions. Yeah, it's really, really cool. But then I love other mountaineering books, like Touching the Void by Joe Simpson is an incredible story of survival in the Cordillera Blanca. A couple of French authors and alpinist, Gaston Rebuffat, wrote Silence and Storm, is one of my favorites. One of his quotes is, "A goal without a plan is just a wish," which is I've always carried with me. It's so brilliant. And then the other French alpinist, the 50s and 60s, Lionel Terray, wrote Conquistadors of the Useless, which is just a much read for anyone who loves the mountains. So I love the time machine. I love going back and imagining what it was like to be these alpinists, these climbers, these skiers in an era where the map was like empty. You could go somewhere in the world and be the first person there to explore this range or to do these climbs or ski descents. And of course, nowadays that's very difficult. The world has been picked over through and through. There's still things out there, but I love just turning back the time machine with the writings of these amazing authors and climbers.
Those are some amazing recommendations. I hope our listeners take notes on that. That's a solid shelf of books.
I should have grabbed the book and held it up. The White Spider.
I'll make a point to list those out, because links to them, because those are all, I've read some of that. Gaston Rebuffat blew my mind as a young
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting that something about mountaineering brings out a certain eloquence in writing, right? I think it's partly connection to nature. It's partly confidence in one's own self to put things down on paper. I mean, there's many examples of great climbers and mountaineers who are great authors. Greg Child is another one who comes to mind. Krakauer is another wonderful author. Maurice Herzog, who did the first ascent of an 8,000 meter peak, wrote Annapurna, which is a legendary tale, maybe somewhat embellished, people say, but I'm enthusiastic about prose like that.
Yeah, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Yeah, sure.
So that's the end of the rapid fire round, which was not that rapid fire.
No, sorry about that.
No, do not be sorry. That's what the beauty of these is things get pulled out that you would have never seen coming. So that was great. I'm glad we talked books. Books mean a lot to me. I read like you wouldn't believe.
What's your favorite book right now?
It hasn't changed in a while. It's called The Master and Margarita. It's by a guy named Bulgakov. It was outlawed when it was written, but it should be just a classic right next to any great classic like Moby Dick.
Okay.
And
I love it.
It used to be called The Devil Comes to Moscow. And because it's about the devil, it was banned, and it will blow your mind. You can never see what's coming next. The writing is beyond descriptive. And he has these characters that just will take you to another dimension. And he also tells two stories at once for a while. And it's like one part of it is the crucifixion of Jesus. And then he's also telling how the devil, it's just the balance and it's out of this world. And I also love Hemingway. I'll text it to you.
Okay, great.
Very, very good. So we'll get into the in-depth questions. And we're going to start with Mount Everest. You summited 29,000 foot Mount Everest in 2011. What was the best part, worst part of that experience?
Yeah, Miles, that was an amazing trip. That was my fourth trip to the Himalaya. And I never really imagined that I would climb Everest. I was not necessarily attracted personally to the commercial side of things, the crowds, of course, you see. And, I like you and like many of us, we like going places that are out of the way where you're not going to see many people. And I'd been to Annapurna, I'd been to Makalu, I'd been to Barunse. So this was my fourth Himalayan trip. I've been to Bhutan since then. But I got hired as a guide with a private client that I had worked with for many years, and I summited on Denali with, and we were getting into the 7 summits, and Everest, of course, is the highest in Asia, and so we ended up on Everest, and I took the responsibility as a guide to get him up there seriously, and was pretty excited about the challenges that mountain would pose. I mean, not so much from the climbing side, because the climbing is not difficult, but from managing time, managing his health and well-being, and just keeping his head in the game. There's tons of details. It's every day you're just dealing with like detail after detail after detail, just kind of managing the group and whatnot. So it was awesome. We had an incredible trip. We nailed everything. I debrief and look back, and it's like there's nothing I would have changed. Guide company that I work with on this type of stuff is Mountain Trip out of Telluride, and they are super pro. And so that was a great relationship. I had worked on Denali with them already, and summit day on Everest was as spectacular a morning or day in the mountains as I have ever had. The sunrise was surreal, like an out-of-body experience. At 4 a.m, the sun coming up over Tibet, over the Tibetan plateau. We had a full moon, the stars. It was no wind. It was probably 10 below zero out, but with, that's not cold up there. And with a warm, suit on, and you're breathing oxygen, which is keeping you warm, supplemental oxygen. I was in heaven. And I was running around like a little kid, shooting video and taking pictures and we had a couple Sherpas helping us out too. So it wasn't like, I had him on a short rope here and there. And when things were easier and he could just be on the fixed lines with his Jumar, I could leave him to do his thing and he could just follow. Man, I was in heaven. It was epic. And when we climbed up over the Hillary Step, and then you see the summit 100 yards out there in front of you, you're like, holy shit, there it is. And the coolest part is when we summited, there was only one other person on top. So for about 15 or 20 minutes, we kind of had the summit to ourselves, which in this day and age is like unheard of. It's busy. We had passed a lot of people through the night, moving quickly, and the weather was great. Shot a lot of photos and video on top, and we peeled off and got down, and it was just kind of textbook, everything gone right. So it was remarkable. And I don't say this about that many mountains. Well, I guess I do. I would go back there in a heartbeat with the right crew, the right people, the right client. It gets so much negative press and like media, but it truly is an incredible, beautiful, powerful mountain.
That was my next question. Would you do it again? And I do want to just let our listeners know right now that you have totally lit up. Your face totally changed. Your eyes totally changed. They're sparkling. You're smiling. So this clearly invoked some serious emotion in you. And it sounds like you were just a kid in the candy store that day.
I was. And then not even that day, the whole 6 weeks we were there. The trek in from flying into Lukla, trekking 9 days into base camp is sort of a trip within a trip. It's a wonderful trek. You're kind of going slow and enjoying the culture of the Khumbu Valley and the Sherpa people. Once you arrive in base camp and you have your puja, your Buddhist ceremony to bless the mountain, then the real sort of work starts to sort of, I guess, break down your rotations and your acclimatization and actually climbing the mountain. But I love the process, and I've always loved the process of mountaineering and ski mountaineering and all the little details that go into that successful descent or ascent and descent, and speaking of descents, my wife, who's a mountain girl and understands all of the things you and I have been talking about, said to me when I left Aspen, she's like, whatever you do, don't fucking call me from the summit. Call me when you get to the bottom, which is brilliant because the summit's only halfway there, most accidents happen on the way down. And so I always felt like if I ever wrote a memoir, it would be Don't Call Me from the Summit.
That's a great title. I love that. And you skied up there, and you went skiing.
We did.
Which is nuts. So you and Neil Beetleman skied the Lhotse face, which is pretty close to the summit of Mount Everest.
Yeah.
And 99.9999 forever % of people will never ski at 27,000 feet. What was it like skiing the Lhotse face, and where does that rank in the ski descents of your life?
Yes, it ranks right up there. It's on the podium, I think. I couldn't go to the Himalaya without bringing my skis just in case, right? So I told my client, like, hey, do you mind if I had hired him after we had planned the trip. I was like, because this is a whole nother side story, but Neil was a big part of the 1996 Into Thin Air disaster on Mount Everest and really had a terrible, I mean, even though he helped people survive, he spent the night out on the South Pole in the huddle. It was an experience that really scarred him and left a big monkey on his back, really. And 15 years later, I'm going back to Everest for the first time. And I was like, Neil, do you want to come? You know, we've just got one client. It could be really great and you could have a great trip. And he came, and it ended up for him being this really cleansing experience. And it's funny, after that, he's gone back 2 or 3 times again.
Really?
Since. Yeah.
Wow.
We said, listen, let's just bring our skis. You know, we don't know what the conditions will be, probably won't get a chance, but if we have them, maybe we could do some skiing. I had my eye on Lhotse and the Lhotse Couloir and the Lhotse Face. And it turned out that on our second rotation up the mountain to acclimatize, we were going up to Camp 2 and spending like 4 days. And then we were going up to touch Camp 3 on the Lhotse Face. We'd had a big storm that had come in and basically caked the face with snow, maybe a foot of powder. And over a period of a couple of days, through Mother Nature's synthesis or special recipe, it just stuck to the face. Humidity, temperature.
And the face is normally ice. Is that correct?
It's black ice. Basically, the whole face is typically black ice. Not only unskiable, but quite challenging for cramponing because it's quite steep and very hard ice. But it all got covered with snow. I spent a day doing snow pits and ski cutting and kind of just like due diligence, trying to figure out if the snow was going to move or not. And I just couldn't get anything to move. And so the next day we were going up to Camp 3. Like, all right, let's bring our skis up here. And we went up with our client and hung out up there. And it was a gorgeous day. Conditions seemed great. We sent him down the fixed ropes with our Sherpa team. And Neil and I'll never forget this because it's about as gripped as I've ever been. I traversed out the upper Lhotse Face off the fixed lines on a rope. It was like a 60-meter rope. So I'm going 200 feet out onto the face. I get out there and I'm kind of like, okay, this feels pretty good. And I dig down like, 8-10 inches, and there's the black ice, and I put an ice screw in, and I clip myself in. So here I am, this teeny little human on one of the biggest alpine faces in the world. And I'm like, Neil, I think I'm okay. Come on out. And so I sort of belay him out to me. He clips in, and here we are, these just 2 totally insignificant biomasses hanging out on this face. And we go, how are you feeling? I'm like, I'm feeling pretty good. He's like, how are you feeling? I asked him, and I'm feeling pretty good. So we unclipped and dropped in, and it was spectacular skiing. It was quiet snow, which is the best kind of snow, powder. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because like skiing was the easy part. Breathing was the hard part. I could make 10 turns and I felt like great, except my heart rate was like, redlining. So we would have to stop and, panting like a dog and catch our breath. And we filmed the whole way down, and it was super spectacular. Crossing the Bergstrand at the bottom and then skiing across one of the ladders on the crevasses. And yeah, I'll never forget it. One of the coolest descents I've ever done, for sure.
Simply spectacular. How many people do you think have ever gotten to ski that?
I don't know the exact number, but it's less than 10. It might be 6 or 8.
Probably just not in very often.
I don't think people have skied it in powder. We skied it in full-on powder. And wow. It was sadly 2 other friends of mine, Chris Erickson, who I think you know Chris.
I love Chris.
Christopher Erickson. And Jamie Laidlaw, they were there that year as well to try to ski the Lhotse Couloir. They were going for the first descent of the Couloir. And they were just so happened to be like a couple days behind us in terms of like their timing to get up there. And it was either the day after or 2 days after we skied the face, a big windstorm came in, which is very typical. And it literally scoured the face, blew our tracks away, blew all that snow off the face, and then it was unskiable. And so those guys didn't get a chance to get it, which was a bummer. And they went up high and they tried, but it was just shit conditions.
Could you mentioned the Lhotse Couloir. Could you briefly tell us what the Lhotse Couloir is? Mm-hmm. And then maybe mention about how Hillary Nelson and Jim Morrison skied it, which is amazing, just a year or 2 ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lhotse is the 4th highest peak on Earth. It's basically a sub-peak of Everest. When you're climbing Mount Everest on the south side, the Nepal side, you go up the Lhotse face and you cross the upper part of the face up to the South Col to your high camp, and then climb 3,000 vertical feet up to the summit of Everest. Or if you were going to climb Lhotse, you basically just continue up the upper Lhotse face until it gets a little steeper and rockier. And there's a wonderful prominent couloir that splits the upper part of Lhotse and heads almost directly to the summit. And it's called the Lhotse Couloir. And it ranges in width depending on how much snow is in there, from really wide, like 100 feet, down to really narrow, probably like 10 feet or even less on a low snow year. But that's the standard climbing route for Lhotse. That's probably where 99% of people that have climbed Lhotse. In fact, I think Lhotse has been climbed via the south face, but I could be wrong. But most people climb the Lhotse couloir. It's a couloir. It holds snow sometimes. So of course it attracts the eye as a skier, but it's rarely in condition. And if you were there in the spring season, then it's difficult to ski because there's so many climbers going up there. There's fixed ropes up the couloir, and you certainly can't ski down while someone's climbing up. You're going to avalanche them out of the couloir or kill them or whatever. Jim Morrison, Hillary Nelson, two of my oldest friends, we met in Chamonix in 1995. They're just two of the most spectacular humans on earth, and very experienced climbers and skiers. Went back 2 years ago to try to ski the couloir in the fall post-monsoon season. They scored. They were in the right place at the right time. Their team, two filmers and their Sherpa crew were the only people on the mountain. So they had to do a lot of hard work getting through the Khumbu Icefall and fixing a bunch of ropes and whatnot. But, they put in that work, and they were humble and respectful of the mountain, and the mountain gods gave it to them. And it's not a gimme. Don't get me wrong, but it's right up there with André Barguil's descent of K2 as the most spectacular high altitude ski descents done in the history of the world. And I'm so happy it was them that did it.
So am I. I'm very, very proud of them. You mentioned the Khumbu Icefall, and I feels like when you're climbing in the south side of Everest, that's the highest objective danger you deal with because it's shifting and moving and it's scary. What was it like crossing the Khumbu Icefall, and how did you mentally digest the risk there?
It is. So the Khumbu Icefall is the glacier basically rolling over a kind of a steeper section of rock that's underneath it, in some cases hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet underneath it. But just like a river will go into rapids where the river drops, more rapidly, the glacier is dropping more rapidly. So it breaks up and becomes all these seracs and ice falls, and it's moving at inches per day. So the route through the glacier, through the Khumbu Icefall, is set by this team of Sherpas. And as you're moving through it, you can feel it moving, you can hear it cracking, and you move deliberately and you move diligently, and you try to get through it as quickly as you possibly can. The route through the glacier over a period of a month is completely different. I remember this one section that was kind of like a narrow hallway, if you will, perhaps 5 feet wide and maybe 50 feet long. And you were sort of walking on snow through it, and you're still connected to a rope all through here in case you're going to fall into a crevasse in the icefall. But by the time we descended at the end of our trip, that hallway, you had to turn sideways to shimmy through it. It kind of compressed. So it's this living thing, and it commands your respect. But it's also, in some ways, it is kind of cool to be so in touch, just like kayaking down a river or, climbing a big wall or something like that. You and the earth are literally like in symbiosis, and like, you better do it right or she's going to spank you.
Absolutely.
And there's also a big seracs hanging up on the west shoulder above you that have come down crashing into the icefall and killed people before, which is why you need to move quickly through there. I think if I was going to go back to Everest, which I would like to do, I would go to the north side for the first time, to Tibet, and climb the North Ridge, just to mix it up. And there's much less objective hazard on that route.
How many times do you think you crossed the Khumbu Icefall?
We crossed the Khumbu Icefall 6 times. So 3 rotations. Yeah, 3 rotations. And nowadays people are using, altitude chambers like hypoxico systems to pre-acclimatize so that they can minimize the amount of time that they spend in the icefall, or the amount of time that they spend, high on the mountain, and do things quickly. Our good friend Adrian Ballinger from Alpenglow Expeditions in Tahoe has sort of been one of the people pioneering this. So it's a different style of climbing. It's faster. One might argue that you sort of eliminate some of the experience of being on an expedition for 2 months or 6 weeks. But at the same time, if you can minimize risk, then why not minimize risk?
Absolutely. Do you have any more high elevation ski plans?
I don't have any current plans, to be honest. A trip that I was guiding in the Alaska range last April that was canceled. So we're hoping to pull it off this coming April, basically a ski mountaineering camp in Denali National Park. Himalayan stuff, to be honest, unless I was there guiding, working, I don't really have personal objectives, mainly because I'm trying to reduce my risk profile rather than increase it. I mean, there's a lot of things out there that I'd like to do, but will I do them? Yeah, probably not.
Great answer. Well, let's move on to the 14er project.
Okay.
And I'll give a little background here. In 2007, you were the very first person to ski all the 54 of Colorado's 14,000 foot peaks, and you did it in 1 year, which was an incredible accomplishment. Just in case people don't understand the gravity of that, I love this quote by Powder Magazine editor Derek Taylor. What Chris accomplished in 2006 elevates him to the upper echelon of ski alpinism. For most skiers, notching a descent from the summit of any one of these peaks would be considered a crowning achievement. The fact that Chris pulled this off in less than a year is downright mind-blowing. So the question is, the 14er project was a genius idea, Chris, on a lot of different levels. How did you come up with this concept?
The short answer is in fall of 2005, after basically a decade of competing and filming, I was kind of over that stuff and looking for something else, and I didn't know what that something else was. I was out on a mountain bike ride just outside my house here. On that ride, kind of had an epiphany. The word 14ers popped into my head. I mean, I've always been kind of a goal-oriented skier and athlete, and was thinking about the coming season and what I wanted to accomplish. And like, I don't want to film or do this or that. And it was like ski mountaineering was not really, I mean, it was very niche. I had been doing some Colorado 14ers, other big mountains in the West, and the word 14er popped into my head. And by the time I got home, I had it all figured out. Like I told my wife, Jessie, like, I know what I'm going to do this winter. I'm going to try to, climb and ski all the 14ers in the state of Colorado. And she's like, what? We've got 2 kids now. I thought you were trying to, take less risk. And because we had that conversation, but I couldn't get it out of my head. I knew it would be a really challenging and really fun project. And so over a period of a couple of weeks, sort of behind her back, I reached out to sponsors and kind of built a project deck and got some funding, and really spoke to like the things that I loved about the mountains. And you and I have talked about this already. It's like, I was going to be out in the big mountains away from ski resorts for like 100 days doing all these peaks. There's 54 peaks, but some of them take, more than 1 day. There was going to be physical and mental challenges there, and challenging my skill level, hopefully elevating it. I was going to be with lots of cool partners. I was going to see parts of the state that I hadn't been to before. It just checked like all these boxes of like what a cool ski mountaineering project or trip should be. And so embarked on it in January of 2006, and every step of the way, it was amazing. It was hard. It was beautiful. It was challenging. I mean, there was moments where I wanted to quit, moments of tears and moments of joy, and like 25 different partners. So, it was awesome. I was just on a roll, and I was basically like, whoever wants to come along, this is like a community thing, like join me, like, let's go. Yeah. And it was interesting timing too. I think the timing is important to mention in that there was very small, very niche backcountry ski market in the United States. I mean, we're talking like 3-pin bindings, telemarking, some import of like Freeskier bindings, and Dynafit was just making a presence in the United States, but it was a nascent market. It was very small. And this project in many ways helped, and the book and movie that came out of it sort of kind of helped kick off what we see now, which is basically like this monster of, backcountry touring and mountaineering.
That really was a genius idea, Chris. And it still just really resonates with me and so many people. And that it created, a community feeling, I think, is the most valuable thing.
If I can just comment on that.
Oh, yeah.
It's not, I think a lot of what you would call, or we would call genius ideas, come from the heart. They come from passion and love of something. In my opinion, it wasn't a genius thing. It was like following what was in my heart, like it was leading me. And that's what popped up in my head that day. And I still remain true to that sort of concept of listening to your own emotions and kind of following where they take you, rather than trying to navigate, well, what would my sponsors like? Well, what would make a big impact with the media? Or like those things are so, in some ways, pointless. You just got to listen to yourself. And if it's a good idea, then maybe people will pay attention, but it has to be personal first.
And that might be the true beauty of it, because it came from your heart, and it was this, work of passion that you created and executed very well with a community. And then at the same time, it appears to have, some people say, rejuvenated your professional skiing career. And do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think it maybe not rejuvenated, but pivoted it for sure. All of a sudden I became, from like competition skier and ski film star to like at the forward end of this like incoming tide of ski mountaineering that for the next decade would just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so right place, right time for sure. Right affiliations and brand partners or sponsors. Absolutely. Great partners, ski partners. Yes. All like a lot of things came together to like make this thing really, really cool. It wasn't just the idea. The book sold, 10,000 copies,
Really?
which was
Wow.
incredible. And that itself was a huge challenge. But yeah, I mean, I think it was just like, again, like right place at the right time, thinking this through, having good support. Yeah, I learned a lot.
As you have to get through something like that. Which 14er do you think was the most difficult?
And, in terms of difficulty, there's different types, right? Like there's the technical difficulty, like Capitol Peak right here near my house, which is, we skied a first descent on it. It had only been skied once before, kind of by the normal standard route down the ridge that Lou Dawson did. And Neil Beidelman and I skied a first descent on the east face that to this day hasn't been repeated. It's still an extremely dangerous route to ski.
Wow.
But then there's also like the difficulty of the Sufferfest and, a 10 or 14 mile approach, just long days that are, to me, those are really hard mentally and physically.
And did you have any close calls on some of those more challenging peaks?
I did actually. I never had any falls personally, but I almost got killed by a rock fall on Mount of the Holy Cross. Mount of the Holy Cross is sort of between Vail and Aspen in the northern Saguache Range. I was leading out from this kind of saddle, this col, up into this couloir, the cross couloir, and my partners had basically screamed out, "Heads up, rock fall!" And I like turned and immediately took one step to the left, as I remember, and a rock the size of a melon perhaps came just smoking down right past where I had been standing, and certainly would have knocked me off my feet, broken my legs, but perhaps would have killed me. That was as close as I ever came to, not making it.
Scary.
Yeah. But again, like, you spend your time out in enough time out in the mountains, shit happens. It's, I've almost been struck by lightning. I've had rock fall. I've had like all these things happen, and it's just a function of time. Like they're going to happen. You got to pay attention.
And it doesn't even take a big, scary mountain. Last year, I was just skiing a little run here called Tanner's Gulch, I think, in the Wasatch, and a bowling ball just rolled right by me, and I never even heard it or saw it coming. Where did this 14ers project lead you?
There was kind of in my own mind a glass ceiling of like what I was capable of. And so what I mean by that is like I'd never challenged myself to something so broad and sort of so difficult, like skiing 54 mountains throughout a whole season, lots of different snow conditions. And I learned so much from a skill side, but also from kind of like a personal side of like what I was willing to do. So that I guess set me on a path to climb and ski all the 14ers in the Sierras and all the volcanoes of the Pacific Northwest, and going out on the 7 summits, which I still haven't finished, but going, more in the Himalaya and trips in the Alaska range, and just kind of like seeking more sort of project oriented goals rather than just hopping on a film or photo shoot kind of thing. So I think it will always rank high in my, career as a skier of accomplishments. But I was young and I was fit and I was motivated, and I had so many wonderful friends around me. And I'll always think back on that year with just incredible fondness. It was really special.
Very, very special project. So you were the world extreme skiing champion in 1996 and in the year 2000. And many see that as a period of the glory days of extreme skiing contests with you and Scott Schmidt and Glenn Plake and Doug Coombs. What differences do you see between extreme skiing competitions now and then?
Well, I'll first say, you mentioned a few icons right there, and all due respect to Glenn and to Scott, and of course to Doug, who was a real mentor of mine. They were really the generation before me.
Okay.
Those guys had come of age in the 80s. And I basically grew up watching Scott and Glenn in Greg Stump movies and Warren Miller movies. And they never competed. Those guys never did the competitions. Doug did. I think Doug won the World Extreme Skiing Championships in the early 90s, and he won Crested Butte, the US Championship. And I met him in 94 in Las Leñas, and immediately was like flies stuck to him, just like trying to follow him everywhere. I was so wanted to learn from this Jedi master. The golden age of competitive free skiing, or extreme skiing as we called it, was going to new locations. So this generation of Americans that went to Chamonix and went to Whistler and went to Alaska and Crested Butte and Snowbird and other locations where there was Jackson, where there was these contests, and just sort of the traveling circus of this crew. We were all in our 20s, like kids. It was so much fun. There didn't seem to be a lot of pressure. There was no social media. It was just like, yeah, go huck your meat and hopefully the judges like it, and make a little money maybe, and it was amazing. And I actually still have a manila folder of like paper results sheets.
Wow.
So you look back and you just see the who's who of the 90s of men and women on this circuit, Europeans and Americans and Canadians and Kiwis and Aussies and a few South Americans. And yeah, it was really cool. I mean, that became my tribe, to this day. Like those are friendships that you'll have forever.
Fantastic. I did some competing as well, and you were alluding to it's very difficult, and I never did very well. And man, it is very humbling, and it is so challenging to get those kind of results. So big.
So you were asking, what's the difference between back then and now? There's differences, but there's also similarities. I mean, you're still up there trying to ski the most difficult line you can, as fast as you can, aggressively, with beautiful technique, making it look good, and just, crushing a difficult line for the judges. The difference now is it's much more freestyle oriented. There's a lot more tricks being thrown into everything. The level is definitely higher, like we see in all sports. Humans are just doing incredible things now. So the way people are skiing now versus the way we skied in the 90s is different. Part of that is equipment. I mean, when I won in 96, I was on GS skis.
Whoa.
Giant slalom ski in Alaska. It's like, you can't haul ass down the mountain. It's like too narrow. You can't surf. So it's more kind of technical, hoppy turning, looking for different kinds of terrain than you would maybe, ski now on a 115 underfoot or wider or whatever you might be on. And, no twin tips or anything like that. So just different technique, but it doesn't remove the fact that it's a competition and everybody's good and you're still trying to win. And I'll never forget skiing a semifinal run and a finals run and nailing it and feeling really good, but not knowing the results, and getting to the award ceremony at the Valdez Convention Center. There was like 600 people out there. The whole town came out. I think Pennywise played the concert that night. It was just a rager. It was amazing. Whoa. And I had no idea. I knew I maybe got the podium, but it was like, third place from Squaw Valley, California. It was like Kent Kreitler, and second place from Squaw Valley, Shane McConkey. And I was like, shit, man, I got fourth. What? It was like, first place from Aspen, Colorado. And I was like, welled up inside, like everybody was, going nuts. So those are wonderful memories. And certainly for me, it'll never be like that again. I wish that all young skiers out there could experience moments like that are just full of like freedom and joy and happiness. And I don't know, it kind of felt like anything was possible. The world was in a good place.
Well, we'll switch to avalanches again. You mentioned some of your stories. We don't need to go back through that, but a lot of people are going to be going into the backcountry for the first time this year because of coronavirus. Yeah. What advice do you have for people just getting into the backcountry this season?
Backcountry skiing is incredible. Obviously, something that you and I love. We've made careers or jobs or businesses out of it, but it's very, very, very dangerous. It's very easy to get into situations that are sort of either beyond your control or beyond your experience level. And I'm really concerned about this upcoming winter with a lot of pressure for people to go into the backcountry for their first time, perhaps not having education or good mentors with them. So I think first and foremost, you have to ask yourself, like, why are you doing it? And when are you doing it? And is it just to ski powder, or is it to gain knowledge and wisdom and experience, you need to have a plan to manage your risk. And it starts with getting an education, knowledge. It starts with understanding how the forecasting works. It starts with having partners, understanding locations, having the right equipment, of course. But that planning process is like, it's oh so critical. And I always talk about this when I do public speaking and slideshows. It's like, how are you going to go out there and manage the risk? Because if things go completely sideways or you have an accident, how do you deal with it? So there's frameworks for all of this. And I encourage people to understand what decision-making processes are, what are strategic mindsets that you might be using. That's like probably one of the most important things to me, is that strategic mindset. So kind of understanding that mindset that sort of matches what the conditions are out there. So like the way I think about going backcountry skiing in the late spring when it's freeze thaw and everything's locked up is different than the way I think about skiing in the middle of the winter, especially here in Colorado, where we've got typically a shallow and weak snowpack. And I'm kind of always sort of maybe stepping back or sort of like status quo, but rarely am I like stepping on the gas pedal and stepping out, you might call it. Yeah. I want rookies. I want new people to think about why they are doing what they're doing and come up with a really good answer. And remember that terrain is our friend and it's our foe, right? If you manage terrain properly, you can go out and have great days of backcountry skiing on slopes less than 30 degrees with powder, with friends, spreading out. Social distancing has always been a thing in the backcountry. This isn't new for us. No. And so if you go out and manage terrain, you can always go out and have fun. But as soon as you decide that you're going to step up the steepness of your terrain, then you get into a situation where terrain can be working against you. And that gets a lot more complex. And you and I could sit here and have a 2-hour conversation about mindset and heuristics of backcountry skiing, because I could talk about this stuff all day long. Have a good understanding of why you're doing what you're doing. Make sure you've got plan B and plan C. And really, I encourage people to just develop like that terrain mindset, where that's what you're looking for, is low angle terrain unless conditions are like really, really in your favor.
I'd like to talk about climate change, which I know is something that's close to your heart. So climate change is truly beginning to affect snow sports via fewer freeze days, warmer temperatures, shorter winters. What evidence of climate change have you seen in your lifetime?
Yeah, I mean, I've spent, the good part of 20 years in major mountain ranges around the world. And in every single one of them, year over year, I have seen physical changes to glaciers, changes to mountain snowpacks, changes to weather patterns and seasons being shorter. I mean, in our own backyard, which is probably the best case for making an argument for seeing this, because you see it the most. The Colorado 14er right near our house here is Snowmass Mountain. Snowmass was named in the late 1800s by some miners that had hiked up there, and it had the largest permanent snowfield in Colorado. It's not a glacier because it's not actually moving down the mountain, but it is a snowfield, and glistened pure white all summer long for decades and decades and decades. In the late 90s, it began receding, and by 2005, it was gone in the summer. The snow mass has disappeared.
I didn't know that.
I was up there. Yeah, I was up there this summer in September climbing a route, and we got up to the top and look down, and it's sad to see this basin, this basically kind of high alpine basin that used to just have year-round snow in it is totally dry. And so, not only is it's sad from, I guess, just the mountain itself not having this beautiful hallmark on it, but that's an incredible water storage story for the upper Colorado River Basin, that these beautiful snowfields that existed across the Rockies are generally gone nowadays.
That's extremely impactful.
And then, of course, I've skied a lot in Chamonix, and there's no better example of glacial retreat than skiing down the Vallée Blanche and having to hike up out of the glacier and seeing the years written on the rock on these plaques that say, here's where the glacier was in 1995, 1985, 1960, 1920. And it's, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet of glacial recess. And this is true again all over the world. It's sad to see. The impacts are real. It's human caused. There is something we can do about it, which is, this is probably a good segue. It's why I've dedicated a lot of my adult life to working with Protect Our Winters and being a climate change activist. I really care. I know we can sort of turn back the clock on global warming. And I've raised my kids to understand the impacts of this science. And I mean, hopefully the next generation can be more impactful than our generation that seems so divided right now.
And something else that has been on my mind is that you and I and many pro snow sports athletes and guides, we travel a lot. It's just part of the deal.
Yeah.
According to the International Council on Clean Transportation, the 12% of Americans who take more than 6 round-trip flights per year are responsible for 2/3 of the air travel, and by extension, 2/3 of the aviation emissions, which adds up to about 3.1 tons of carbon dioxide per year. And according to EPA, transportation is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. How should snow sports professionals like us confront being higher than average contributors to greenhouse gas emissions for traveling, while at the same time promoting a message of fighting climate change?
Yeah, I mean, it's a slippery slope. I mean, you bring up a number of good points. I will say, in my research and understanding, fossil fuel usage for energy and heating is by far the largest contributor to climate change, more than double transportation. So basically, coal-fired power plants, that's the biggest emitter. But transportation for sure is huge. And I've been closely involved in actually the shutting down of two coal-fired power plants here in the West, which has been an awesome victory. And people are like, oh, well, what about those jobs? And you know what? We created actually 10 times as many jobs with renewable energy projects. So there's a really great transition that can go on from fossil fuel-based energy to renewable energy right now. If we have the political will to incentivize this financially, the writing's on the wall. Fossil fuels it's over. It's done. When it comes to transportation, yes, I'm the first one to admit that my carbon footprint has been, or is, well, I shouldn't say is because I haven't traveled at all this year.
None of us.
But over the last 20 years, I've flown a lot, and that is a big contributor. You gave the statistics. I will say that when you're on an airplane that's full, the per person carbon emissions are not as high as one might think. And I do feel like all of the work that I've done as an activist with Protect Our Winters, lobbying with Congress and Senate in Washington, D.C., working with the EPA, getting involved politically here, locally and regionally in Colorado, raising money for candidates that have climate agendas. I feel personally like that is a strong offset for the travel that I've done and the carbon impact that I've had. I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't be an activist if I hadn't seen these parts of the world and had an understanding of what's at stake. How do you, if you never left your state, wherever you might live, how do you know how beautiful the world is and why it's worth protecting? And, unless you go see these places, whether it's national parks or mountain ranges or, glaciers and ski resorts and what have you. So I think that's given me, in some way, that experience has given me license to have a voice. I don't take it for granted.
I think it does appear many people think that we really need large scale change, like the government stepping in. We need to change our industries. But we'll keep moving here because you host a superstar ski camp in Portillo, Chile, in the central Andes of South America. And this is something I want to...
climate change.
Yeah, so I want to touch on this. So it's interesting because I don't know a whole lot about these mega droughts, but there's a mega drought happening in Chile and Argentina in the central Andes for the past 10 years. It may be related to climate change. Here's what NASA has to say about the Chilean mega drought. So NASA says, no drought in Chile's modern meteorological record since 1915 has lasted longer. Paleoclimatologists who look for clues of past conditions in tree rings estimate that the last mega drought of this scale probably occurred in the region more than 1,000 years ago, according to René Garhu, a scientist at the University of Chile. So that's NASA saying that. And the implications are huge. There's been all kinds of things, including tens of thousands of farm animals dying. And so how many years have you been skiing in the central Andes of Chile? And what have you seen during this mega drought?
So I've been skiing there for 24 years. This would have been my 20th year in a row working in Portillo, Chile. Prior to that, I'd skied for, 4 seasons in Las Leñas. And man, I have seen the writing on the wall. As you just said, the last 10 years have basically been lower than average winners with a couple disastrous winners in there, including the winner of 2019, which basically didn't happen. There was hardly any moisture in the central Andes. Fortunately, a couple resorts had installed some snowmaking, so there was some artificial snow to ski on. But the impacts for the ski and recreational industry were devastating. The impacts for the agriculture industry were much, much worse because that industry is gigantic. Fruit, especially in Chile, whether it's grapes for the massive wine industry or other fruits, and then in general agriculture, I believe it's the second largest industry in Chile after minerals and mining.
I'll butt in really quick to assist you here. In August 2019, Chile's Minister of Agriculture declared agricultural emergencies in more than 50 municipalities in Chile. Continue.
Yes. I was there in August of 2019, and it was really scary how dry everything was. You could just feel it. Another just close example in Portillo, one of the things that makes the Portillo ski area so beautiful is that the resort sits at the foot of this incredible lake called the Laguna del Inca, Lake of the Inca. And it's just one of the most spectacular alpine lakes in the world, with 13 and 15,000 foot peaks rising on either side of it. It's pristine. The water is super clean. And for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, the lake would freeze every winter. The lake is at 9,000 feet, so it's quite high. So it would freeze every winter. And the first 10 years I went there, we would ski across the lake because it was frozen. And you could access a lot more terrain when the lake was frozen. And starting in about 2010, 2011, it maybe one year it didn't freeze, the next year it did, and then it hasn't frozen now in probably 9 years. And so they actually had to build or blast through the cliffs a traverse to get from this really great ski run called the Lake Run back to the main part of the ski area, because the only way you could do it before that was to ski across the lake. So since the lake no longer froze, the resort had to take, kind of extreme measures and build like a goat path across the cliffs. So yeah, we're seeing it firsthand there. I'm not sure that the Andes can take another bad winter. It might just destroy the entire ski resort industry down there.
Dramatic. And it sounds like a lot of people do attribute this change to climate change.
Oh, it's not a lot of people. I mean, it's 100%. It's absolutely what's happening with the Pacific Ocean, especially the warming of ocean currents, the way La Nina and El Nino set up. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I would never pretend to be a climate scientist, but the research is out there for if you want to discover why it's not snowing in the Andes anymore. It's pretty obvious.
So you are also an author, one of your many facets, and you've written quite a few books, but one of them that is quite popular at the current time is the 50 Classic Ski Descents of North America. Tell me a little bit about the process of writing that book.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Basically, in high school, I had this wonderful English teacher who inspired me. Even, I think it was just one day. He's like, Chris, you should write a book one day. It'd be good for you. I was into writing. I went to some good schools, Holderness School in New Hampshire for high school, and then University of Colorado. I worked hard and I was a good student. And so that always sort of stuck with me. And after the 14ers project, as I mentioned earlier, I wrote the book Ski the 14ers, beautiful coffee table book. And that was really challenging. And I enjoyed the editorial process, the writing process, the layout. After the success of that book and going out and skiing a lot more big mountains, I was like, there's another book idea out there somewhere. And my good friend Penn Newhard here in Aspen was like, well, what about 50 Classics? Like we love the book 50 Classic Climbs, which is a famous climbing and mountaineering book, 50 Classic Climbs of North America. We think that the ski industry and backcountry skiing and mountaineering has gotten to the point where 50 classic ski descents could be a thing. And so we, as a group, along with our other friend Art Burrows, embarked on this project to identify 50 beautiful mountains, get some great contributors from all over North America, because, who are we, three skiers from Aspen, Colorado, to say what the best routes are in the Sierra or the Tetons or Canada or Alaska. We really wanted to make it a community effort and have people from all these different regions contributing. And again, I'll say it's not the 50 classics. It's just 50 classics. It's just 50 great routes. There's thousands of wonderful ones out there. And people will say, well, why didn't you include this or that? We started with like 100, and ultimately a lot of what we included came down to what we had great photography of and great stories about. So again, it's not the definitive list, but the process of writing the book was awesome, really time consuming. But the reward when that thing arrives back from the publisher printed and you can look at it and hold it in your hand, it's very sort of tactile. Something that makes me as proud as any ski descent that I've done. Those books are really cool.
It's a spectacular book. If people haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. I love the write-up about Mount Timpanogos by Andrew McLean, a friend of ours who I've also interviewed here on the Snowbrains podcast. And segueing, Cody Townsend, who's going to be on the Snowbrains podcast soon, is attempting to be the first person to ski all of them, which is kind of insane. The guy is very impressive. I think he's already done 26 of them or something in one season. It's amazing. Might you ski any of those with him?
Yes, I would like to. Cody and I have been talking. In fact, if anyone's listened to Cody on other podcasts, he'll tell you the story. He came to me in the summer of 2018 in Portillo because he coaches my ski camp down there. And he's like, hey, I've got this project. And I kind of was like, I think I know what you're going to say. He's like, I want to try to climb and ski them all. I was like, oh man, this is awesome. You're the guy to do it. Like, why not? Like, you have my blessing and I will love to join you. I didn't get to ski with him last winter. Our schedules just didn't connect. And then of course, COVID happened, but this coming season, my plan is to try as best as I can to get out there. There's a number of ski descents in that book. And I've actually have done 24. Just kind of by chance.
No way. Wow.
Yeah. Over the years, not quickly, but just over the years. And so I'd like to get out there on some difficult ones with him, some different parts of the North America. And like any list, whether it's Colorado 14ers or Wasatch Shooting Gallery, what have you, there's always low-hanging fruit. There's some easy ones or easier ones. Then there's ones that you want to get in good conditions. And then there's these dream lines that are really difficult. They've only been done a couple times, if that. And you have to hit them on that one day of the year that they're in. So there's, 2, 3, 4 of those in that book, which not only for Cody, but Salt Lake skier Noah Howell is also trying the project. And he's pretty far along as well. I got to mention Noah. He's a good buddy.
Noah's a beast.
Yeah. So there's huge challenges. I see in my crystal ball, if you will, both of those guys getting well into the 40s and then coming up against some serious challenges because those those really difficult ones are ones that, might take you 10 years to hit it right.
Which do you think is the most difficult?
Perhaps in terms of conditions, it might be Mount Robson, the north face of Mount Robson, the highest peak of the Canadian Rockies. Up until this past year, it only been done once. Now it's been done twice. Got repeated by, I think, just one young guy. So that's just all about timing. And you really can't just fly up there or drive up there and expect to hit it right. You got to basically be living there and nail it when the right storm comes in. I think the cover of the book is the picture of the south face of University Peak, which is 9,000 vertical feet plus in the Alaska Range in the Wrangell St. Elias Mountains. Sorry, not the Alaska Range, the Wrangell St. Elias Mountains. I have literally flown in a Super Cub and landed at the foot of that face and stood there for hours, like looking at it. And it is super intimidating. Physically to climb that thing, 9,000 feet is scary to think about. There's changing conditions because it's so much vertical. It's really steep. The whole thing's basically a no-fall zone. So, all of the skills of a life spent in the mountains and a life spent skiing have to come together in a moment to be able to pull something like that off.
I've seen University. I've seen Mount St. Elias. They are ominous. And
yeah.
I kind of also think, learning all this from you and putting together the pieces, it's kind of cool in a way. What Cody's doing is a bit of a tribute to you. You are sort of the first one to popularize this list, and then as well as he's using your book to do that. So that's very cool. And then I'll jump right into, you have a family that you've mentioned. You have a wife. You have 3 boys. And family's changing very fast, and so you're changing very fast as well. How has having a family changed your risk tolerance in the mountains?
I think that it's made me a better risk manager. I wouldn't say that when I had young kids in the 2000s, it didn't make me sort of, I guess, back up and go, oh, I shouldn't be doing these things. Much like if you're a car racer and you have kids, you're not going to drive slower. You're a car racer, that's like what you do. So it wasn't that I was taking less risk. It's that I really put a lot more energy and effort into educating myself, becoming a better risk manager, understanding more of the human sides of what I was doing. And, I guess, getting more of the science behind snow and behind mountains, but also like, for me, it was more about like the decision-making processes and the human side of things that became more important. And so I just strove to become better at what it was that I do, or what it is that I do. And I think, my kids made me a better athlete and a better guide and a better skier.
Clearly a fantastic supportive family. That's huge.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about your body, Chris. Looking good. You're looking good, man. But you're 49 years old, as I understand it, and you're still charging. You're still doing incredible things, high level things. How's your body changed over your career, and what are you doing differently now to stay in shape? What would you tell people at your age? What are we doing here to keep up this high level?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been an athlete my whole life. As a young kid, as a ski racer, as a skier, throughout my adult life. So I've always kind of had the athletic mindset, which is, in my opinion of it, is always be training. Everything you do, whether you're running up the stairs of your house or you've got a free half hour to do something, like I'm always in that training mindset, like always be doing something that's going to improve you. And yeah, I mean, right now, like this summer during COVID, I mean, I wasn't skiing. I did ski a little bit, went out to Mount Hood and skied around here in the early summer. But I said, I've always been a cyclist as well. I've loved the bike since I was a little kid. Bike raced at a high level as a junior. And I said, you know what, I'm going to see how much I can ride this summer. And I rode yesterday afternoon after skiing, actually, and I'm almost at 6,000 miles for the year. So that's pretty, yeah. That's something I just kind of committed myself to, is like, I'm going to see how much I can get after it. And that was amazing. I lost 13 pounds. Not that I was like fat or big, but when you're on the road guiding and skiing and having big dinners and, partying with your clients and stuff, like as soon as I put 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 miles in, my body just went like just tightened right up and got down to fighting weight again, which was awesome. Like when I used to race. So yeah, I went from almost 180 to like 166 this spring and summer.
How tall are you, Chris?
I'm 5'11 and a half, 5'11 and change.
So that's a good fighting weight for you.
Yeah, it was good. And so, yeah, I mean, I've been a vegetarian since I was a teenager. I never really liked meat. It just never worked for my physiology. Wasn't an ethical or, decision around that it wasn't the right thing to do. It was just like, I never liked it. And so that's been 30 something years of no animals. I do eat fish here and there, but yeah, I think that's been helpful to just maintaining healthy lifestyle. And
I think that's something you hear from a lot of athletes or just people who are in great shape. Like I know some older folks that are in their 80s and they just look amazing. They can do pull-ups, and it's just seems to be the overall overreaching ideology is just keep it going. Yeah. Don't stop. People let it go and it goes. If you just don't let it go, keep it rolling, you're good.
And it's also, it's in your mind, right? Like I'm in the process of growing up. I'm not sure I'll ever get there, but like, I feel very youthful. I feel like I love to play. I love being outdoors and having fun. I love surrounding myself with people that are having fun. And, while I take my life seriously, I'm not a serious person. I'm a fun person. And I think there's something to be said for anti-aging if you can just be having fun and look at life as a playground and a challenging one and work hard at it to get good at it. But like, yeah, that mindset of having fun and always be learning is critical.
For those of you who haven't seen Chris, he's got a very baby face. He looks like he's 29 years old. He's got a full head of hair and he has no gray hair at all. It's pretty annoying.
Indeed.
So the coronavirus is hitting us. We're almost tired of hearing about it. But the beauty that I've been finding is that there's these coronavirus silver linings. Mm-hmm. So what do you think would be the silver lining of this ski season? And what silver linings have you seen already?
one personal silver lining has been that, my kids are all out of the house. We're empty nesters. And from March, like 16th or 18th until September 1st, all three boys were in the house, and we had an amazing spring and summer together. We had tons of adventures. No, there wasn't a single argument in the whole house. It really was like maybe the last time that we will ever be able to do that. And we didn't, know that it was going to happen, but it was awesome to just connect as a family like that as the kids are older. So that was really cool on a personal level. There's so many negatives. There's so many unknowns. So when it comes to silver linings, it's hard to say. I am excited that the outdoors and the outdoor industry is booming. This summer, cycling and hiking and trail running and every aspect of the outdoors was just crushing it. It looks like that's going to happen in backcountry skiing and snowboarding as well, but that's a lot more dangerous. So while that's nice that people are wanting to buy gear and go learn how to ski tour and skin and discover the backcountry, that comes with a much greater responsibility. You and I talked about it at the beginning of this podcast. So I'm not sure I call that a silver lining yet, because it could have disastrous consequences. The last thing any of us want is a lot of avalanche fatalities this year because COVID has pressured people into going into the backcountry, right? Like I said earlier, why do we go in the backcountry? If you're saying I'm going backcountry skiing because the resort is too crowded, maybe that's not the right answer. We have to filter all of these things. So we'll see. I don't know, but you know what? 2020 sucks. I freaking hate it. It's been a really challenging year as an athlete, as a guide. It's been really challenging. A lot of my companies are, I won't say struggling, but I certainly wouldn't want to be a young up and coming wannabe pro skier right now. There's not a ton of opportunity out there. It's tricky.
Well, those are some good silver linings and, some obvious, consequences of the coronavirus that we have to take into account, because this is the world we live in. But we're going to get through it, and it's going to be good, and it's going to be okay. But things are going to be different. Chris, that's all I've got for you. Do you have anything else you'd like to add here at the end of the show?
Well, I would just encourage everybody to get outdoors. It's good for you, but be safe in doing it. And stay close to your loved ones. We'll all get through this, as you just said, Miles. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this amazing world of mountains and snow sliding that we live in, because it is really special. And thanks a lot for having me on your podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here, Chris. It was great talking to you today. Let's talk again, and I hope we get to ski together again soon.
I would love that. Thanks. Yeah, we'll see you out there.
Thank you, Chris. To learn more about Chris Davenport or to be guided by Chris Davenport, please visit chrisdavenport.com. That's ChrisDavenport.com. Thank you so much for listening to the Snowbrains podcast. If you liked this podcast, please share with your friends and family, and please subscribe. To find out more about Snowbrains, please visit us at snowbrains.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Snowbrains. This episode of the Snowbrains podcast was brought to you by Alta Ski Area. The editing of this episode was done by Robert Wilkinson. The music was created by Chad Crouch. I'm your host, producer, and creator, Miles Clark. Thank you for listening.